We have always said that the West, particularly the US, is hypocritical, and thankfully, a former US official has recently pointed out that hypocrisy. You see, for a long time, the US has painted this image and created the narrative that it is the champion of justice, equality, democracy, and accountability. In reality, however, the US is far from that. These so-called principles practiced by the West are actually a cover to protect and further its interests. Unfortunately, not many people are aware of this. Recently, a former US official called out the hypocrisy of the West in relation to the military leaders of the Sahel region. But what exactly did he say, and will the US heed his words? Let's find out. In a recent interview with the media house Voice of America, the former US Undersecretary for African Affairs, Tibor Navy, has called on President Trump's administration to foster cooperation with African coup leaders. According to him, the US ought to treat coups individually and also shun hypocrisy. He said, US engagement needs to be different. Our lecturing, for example, the military government in Niger, I think has a lot to do with us being kicked out of some valuable airbase. In the whole issue of coups, I think it is important for the United States to look at coups individually. Tibor Navy further criticized the fact that the United States calls some takeover coups and doesn't describe the same for others. For example, he questioned why the US had not designated the takeover in Gabon a coup. He then went on to emphasize the need for honesty and flexibility in the US engagement with African military leaders. He said, "We just need to be a little bit more honest and say we need to be more flexible in our way of engagement with these governments." According to him, the military government needs more engagement with the US so that the US can help them move forward, especially those popular with the people when the coups happen. Tibor further argued that the US is trying to lecture the military juntas more about democracy, which should not be the case. He added that the US should be less hypocritical in engaging with African governments where they are and not where the US wants them to be. Now let's analyze his statement. The former US official started by saying that the new US administration should foster cooperation with the leaders of the Sahel, and the only way the US can do this is if it shuns hypocrisy and treats the coups individually. First of all, we want to point out that although Tibor's statement is correct, the reason he is saying this is because he has realized that the US is losing influence in Africa just like France. But as we said, Tibor's statement is true. When the coups occurred in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, nobody thought about finding out the reasons the coups occurred. Immediately, these countries were shunned and hit with sanctions by the international community as if they committed the worst sins possible. Before we proceed, here is a reminder to like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so already. Now, interestingly, the international community didn't even consider the fact that the citizens of these countries accepted the coup, which is strange given the fact that democracy ought to be about the people. But as Tibor said, the US was more interested in lecturing Niger, for instance. Think about it. After the coup occurred in Niger, the US sent its military officials to discuss the way forward with the authorities in Niger regarding its military base in the country. Instead of the US discussing on the basis of partners, the US was focused on asserting its superiority and giving demands and commands, which was strange given the fact that Niger is not a part of the US. If you recall, the US demanded that if Niger wanted the US military cooperation to move forward, Niger would have to end its diplomatic relations with Russia. Again, this is absurd and strange. How can a foreign country come to another country and start making demands? Did the US truly think that the military government of Niger would agree to the condition that the only way to continue military cooperation with them is to end its partnership with Russia and Iran? Did they truly think that they are so important? Come to think of it, what exactly did their presence in Niger do to quell the insecurity? The answer is absolutely nothing. How can the greatest military power in the world be present in a place and yet insecurity and terrorism have not been reduced but have persisted and even increased? What has their so-called surveillance on the terrorists done to help the fight against terrorism in Niger? Again, the answer is nothing. The fact is, the US base was only there to make sure the terrorists don't spill past the Sahel into the West, show its military might, be ready in case West Africa decides to do something against the West, and gather information about West African countries. What this means is that the US military did not in any way benefit Niger, a concept the US has failed to understand. So, demanding that Niger end military cooperation with countries that want to help them fight insecurity, one exchange for their continued military cooperation which hasn't benefited Niger in any way, has got to be the dumbest idea the US has ever had. And like the former US official said, this is exactly what got the US kicked out of Niger. But here is where it gets even more interesting. As Tibor said in the interview, the US is very hypocritical in the sense that it calls some takeovers a coup and describes the others with a different name. Think about it. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso were not the only countries in the Sahel region where coups occurred. Chad, Gabon, and Guinea also have coups. But as Tibor asked, why did the US not call the takeover in Gabon a coup? And why were Chad, Gabon, and Guinea not hit with sanctions? This is the hypocrisy of the US and the West we are talking about. The reason the coup in Chad, Gabon, and Guinea has not been condemned by the US is because the US is still benefiting from the military government in these countries. You see, after the coup occurred in Niger, the US refused to call the coup a coup. The US simply referred to it as a takeover. And the reason was that the US has interest in Niger, which includes one of its most expensive and valuable military bases in Niger. The US was prepared to continue calling the coup a takeover until it became obvious that the military government of Niger had no interest in dancing to its tune. That was when the US called it a coup and hit Niger with sanctions. How hypocritical. You see, contrary to what everyone thinks, the US does not hate military governments. In fact, history has shown us that the US has not only worked with military governments in the past, but has also installed military governments. Yes, the so-called champion of democracy has been responsible for orchestrating and supporting military governments in Africa and other parts of the world as long as it's in their interest. This is hypocrisy at its best. This is why Tibor has urged the new administration of President Trump to be honest and flexible. But as we said, Tibor is simply saying all this because it has become glaringly obvious that the US is losing its influence in Africa. Right now, the dominant partners in Africa are gradually becoming Russia and China. Tibor said that the military government needs more engagement with the US so that the US can help them move forward, especially those popular with the people when the coups happen. But that is not true. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso do not need the US to move forward. They have moved forward by themselves. Actually, it's the US that needs these countries, but it's already too late. In our opinion, it's highly unlikely that the military government of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso would want to engage with the US, except if the US shows a different attitude. So, the question is, will the Trump administration heed the words of its former official? Well, it's not very clear. From his past term as President of the United States, we know that Trump is not really keen on building US-Africa relations. So, it remains to be seen. Now, it would interest you to know that not every Western country is hypocritical like the US, at least when it comes to relations with the military governments of the Sahel region. Few months ago, Germany revealed that it was ready to deepen cooperation with the military government of Burkina Faso. You see, President Ibrahim Traoré and the military leaders of Mali and Niger are perfect examples of leaders who stick to their beliefs regardless of the consequences. They serve as a lesson to other African leaders who are willing to become puppets of the West because they are under pressure. If a leader sticks to his beliefs long enough, the West has no choice but to cooperate with him. Do you know why? It's because they need Africa. When Ibrahim Traoré came to power, the country faced severe condemnation and sanctions from the West and Europe. It is believed that many European countries, including Germany, have suspended cooperation with Burkina Faso until Ibrahim Traoré restores power to a civilian government and holds new elections. But despite the sanctions and the difficulties that come with them, Traoré remained resolute and persevered. This perseverance has paid off. Not only did the US Congress recognize that Ibrahim Traoré and the rest of the juntas are, in their own words, sophisticated, that is, intelligent, and not easily influenced, but the German Federal Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development, Svenja Schulze, recently paid a diplomatic visit to Burkina Faso. So, making Germany the first European country to visit the country since Europe decided to suspend cooperation with Burkina Faso after President Traoré took office. Now, the reason this is important and significant is that when Traoré came to power, he did not kneel down to Europe and beg that they resume financial aid to his country, nor did he seek a partnership with Europe like most African leaders would. He also did not succumb to the pressure of financial sanctions imposed on his country. Instead, he explored other alternatives, and now Europe has begun to realize that it is slowly losing its position in the Sahel region as countries fight to get a piece of it, because the world understands that Africa is the future. For this reason, Germany decided to seek cooperation with Burkina Faso and take the first steps to resume the partnership. During the visit, the German minister met with key government officials, including the Burkina Faso foreign minister, as well as representatives of civil society and other interest groups. But the most important part of her visit to Burkina Faso was her statement in an interview when asked about Germany's cooperation with the Burkina Faso military regime. The German foreign minister said that Germany wants to cooperate with democracies around the world, but that the German government has come to the realization that most of its people live in an authoritarian system, and there is nothing that can be done about it, and therefore it must deal with it. Isn't it interesting to hear that? Coming from the same people who condemned Burkina Faso as if seizing power by a coup instead of elections was the worst crime in history. This is certainly interesting. But the question is, why do Germany and other European and Western countries forget the fact that not every country is democratic? And the fact that they think that democracy is the best form of government does not mean that other countries have democracy as well to practice? The point is that it is time for Western and European countries to realize that any country is free to choose the form of government it wants to practice, and that the era of pressuring other countries to practice their form of government should end. The German minister further stated that Germany wants to fight climate change and to allow people to feel comfortable in their homes without feeling the need to emigrate, and that for this, cooperation and acceptance of all kinds of governments is necessary. She added that there is no black and white when it comes to cooperation and partnerships, and added a key statement that reveals another reason why Germany decided to resume its partnership with Burkina Faso. The German minister made it clear that Germany is aware that if Germany does not stay in the region, there will be another country to replace it, and the other country she is referring to is none other than Russia. She made it clear that Germany cannot afford to cede the region to Russia and needs development cooperation and partnership with Burkina Faso. It sounds a bit desperate, but this only emphasizes the point that Africa does not need the West or Europe. It is the West and Europe that Africa needs. Africa should not beg for cooperation and partnership with Western countries, regardless of their so-called economic or military power. Whenever there is an Africa-US summit, Africa-Europe summit, or Africa-other summit, African leaders do not need to pack their bags and go to the country where the summit is being held, because these summits only serve to demonstrate that the host country can be powerful if African leadership overcomes its weakness. It is time for African leaders to be confident, and things will change when African leaders understand that they do not need to beg or play victim to get what they want. Now, in response to the German minister's remarks on Russia's cooperation with Burkina Faso, the Burkinabe foreign minister frankly told the German minister that cooperation with Russia is a matter of supply and demand. He said that Russia respects Burkina Faso's decisions, and its proposal is to be a partner that meets the needs of the Burkinabe government and people. Before discussing partnerships, Germany needs to understand that Russia is already a partner of Burkina Faso, and that any partnership with Germany must fit into this framework. That's great. Burkinabe's leadership has really changed. Germany, like other European and Western countries, does not want African countries to cooperate with Russia to reduce the so-called Russian influence in Africa. That is why the German minister visited Burkina Faso. He also said that if Germany continues to suspend cooperation with Sahel countries, it does not want Russia to occupy their territory. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius also confirmed this in February, saying that it is time for Germany to change its approach and seek closer cooperation with African countries, even if they do not share the same values or meet democratic standards. He added, If we refuse to cooperate with certain African countries because they do not fully meet our standards and values, Russia will step in. Normally, this is neither in the country's interest nor in the stability of the region. What would we have gained then? Honestly, not much. Of course, we understand that what Germany is actually worried about is not the well-being or stability of African countries, but rather what to get from them. But the point is that Germany now understands that the only way to compete with Russia and China is to move away from its previous paternalistic and superior attitude and way of working with Africa, and to embrace African solutions like China and Russia did this time in cooperation with Africa. That is really great, but what is even more great is the answer from the Burkina Faso foreign minister to the Russian minister. Recall that before Traoré took power, expelled the French soldiers and severed all colonial ties with the former colonial masters, France was telling Burkina Faso which countries to partner with. So, if Burkina Faso wanted to enter into a partnership with another country, it needed the prior consent of France. Imagine that. But things started to change when Captain Traoré took over the helm of the government. Mr. Traoré made it clear that he was leading Burkina Faso down the path of sovereignty, and nothing would deter him from this path. And this path of sovereignty means that Burkina Faso can choose who it wants to partner with. A country like Germany has no right to dictate to Burkina Faso with whom it wants to enter into a partnership. That is why the Burkina Faso foreign minister told the German foreign minister in clear terms that he should no longer imagine that Burkina Faso will terminate cooperation with Russia just because Germany wants to resume cooperation with Russia. He told her bluntly that if Germany wants a partnership with Burkina Faso, it must take into account that Russia is already a partner of Burkina Faso and will continue to be so. Now, what does that mean? The tables have turned and Burkina Faso is now setting the terms of the agreement, despite the fact that Burkina Faso begged for a partnership, and instead of accepting all the conditions that other countries offer, the German-Burkina Faso partnership amounts to a huge amount of 28.1 billion euros. This huge promise did not convince the Burkina Faso military junta to change its attitude. Now it is understandable why the Burkina Faso Prime Minister stated that Captain Traoré's leadership is made up of people with a mission to transform Burkina Faso, not politicians. This is true leadership and all African countries should strive for it. If every African leader can come to the realization that it's the world that needs Africa, there is no doubt that Africa would be in a better place. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video.